Picture yourself on the open ocean, surrounded by nothing but endless blue in every direction. No compass in your pocket, no GPS to guide you, not even a map to unfold. Just the vast, unknowable sea stretching to the horizon and the immense sky above. This wasn't some survival challenge or extreme adventure. It was daily life for the ancient mariners who crossed thousands of miles of ocean long before the invention of modern navigation tools. They did what we would consider impossible today. They read the world like a living, breathing story, interpreting patterns and signs that most of us would overlook entirely. And they didn't just survive, they thrived, settled new lands, built cultures, and connected distant islands into vast networks of trade and tradition, all guided by the subtle language of nature itself. What if I told you that the sky wasn't just a beautiful expanse of blue and stars to these early explorers? It was their map. The flight patterns of certain birds weren't just random. They were directional arrows pointing the way to land. The winds weren't merely forces of nature. They were ancient voices, carrying secrets only the most attentive could understand. These navigators saw the world not as separate elements, but as one interconnected system, a grand celestial and environmental guidebook written in stars, waves, and wings. It's almost like they possessed a sixth sense, one honed by generations of observation, courage, and profound respect for the natural world. And the most incredible part, we're still unraveling the depth of their knowledge today. In the words of Polynesian voyaging master Nainoa Thompson, the ancient Polynesians sailed across the Pacific using only the stars, the waves, and the flight of birds. That simplicity belies a sophistication we're only beginning to fully appreciate. This video is an invitation to step into their world, to see the ocean as they saw it, to decode the sky as they did, and to understand how myths, gods, and natural phenomena weren't just stories but functional, life-saving technologies. We'll explore how bird gods served as spiritual compasses, how star patterns formed sky maps burned into memory, and how wind and wave rhythms created a navigational symphony. By the end, you won't just learn about history, you'll gain a new way of looking at the world, one that connects you to the ingenuity, wonder, and sheer bravery of those who came long before us. So come with me, let's set sail into the past, guided by the stars, the birds, and the whispers of the wind. To understand how these ancient sailors turned the sky into a map, we must first look not just to the stars, but to the creatures that bridge the worlds of sea and land. For them, birds were far more than animals. They were divine messengers, and their behavior was a language that could mean the difference between life and a lonely death at sea. This wasn't mere superstition, it was a sophisticated system of environmental observation, so vital and revered that it became woven into the very fabric of their spirituality. Cultures across the globe deified birds, transforming them into powerful gods who held the secrets of direction and safe passage. In the vast expanse of the Pacific, Polynesian voyagers looked to the god Lono, who was intimately associated with the albatross. This wasn't a random choice. The albatross is a phenomenal seabird, capable of flying thousands of miles over open water and returning to specific islands to breed. To a sailor adrift in the immense blue, seeing an albatross was like seeing a divine signpost. It was Lono himself guiding them toward land. They knew these birds would fly out to sea to fish, but must always return to land to rest. So, by carefully observing the direction of a bird's flight at different times of day, whether it was heading out with an empty belly or returning with a full one, a navigator could plot a course toward unseen shores. This practical knowledge was mirrored in their mythology, creating a beautiful fusion of belief and survival. Similarly, ancient Egyptians didn't just admire the falcon for its speed and keen sight. They saw it as the embodiment of the god Horus, the lord of the sky. His eyes were the sun and the moon, celestial bodies that themselves were fundamental to navigation. Horus was believed to guide the souls of the dead through the treacherous underworld, just as a sailor would hope to be guided through treacherous waters. The bird wasn't just a symbol, it was a functional representation of the navigational principles they relied upon: height, perspective, and unwavering direction. This deep connection meant that specific bird species became living instruments in the navigator's toolkit. Terns, for instance, rarely venture far from land. Spotting one meant an island was likely within a few dozen miles. Boobies and frigate birds would fly out to sea in the morning to fish and return to their island nests in the evening. A navigator seeing a line of birds flying steadily in one direction at dusk had a perfect bearing to follow. This required an encyclopedic knowledge of ornithology, knowing each species' range, its habits, its maximum distance from land. This information was passed down through generations, not in dry scientific texts, but through the stories and attributes of the bird gods. The myth of the god was the vessel that carried the practical data. It was a way of encoding life-saving information into the culture, ensuring it would be remembered, respected, and passed on. The divinity of the bird god ensured that the observation of the bird itself was treated with the utmost seriousness and reverence. It was a system that honored the natural world by recognizing its signs as the language of the divine, turning every flight pattern into a prayer and every successful landfall into a testament of faith. But the celestial map was far more than just a collection of stationary points of light. For master navigators, the night sky was a dynamic, rotating clock. They didn't just know where a star was, they knew when it would be there and what its path across the heavens meant for their course. Polynesian voyagers, for example, conceptualized the sky as a dome, with their canoe stationary at its center and the stars moving overhead in predictable arcs. They divided this dome into 32 houses, a mental construct known as the star compass, where each segment represented a specific direction defined by the rise and set of key stars. A star rising directly in the east would be in the house called La, while its setting point in the west was Lolo. By memorizing which stars lived in each house and their paths, a navigator could always find his bearing. If clouds obscured his guiding star, he simply waited for another to emerge from a known house, instantly reorienting himself within this grand celestial architecture. This system required an almost unimaginable depth of knowledge committed entirely to memory. We're not talking about a dozen constellations, we're talking about hundreds of individual stars, each with its own name, story, and navigational purpose. The star known to us as Sirius was to Polynesian sailors, a brilliant beacon whose sharp rising and setting marked the eastern and western horizons with unwavering reliability. For those sailing south of the equator, the constellation crux, the Southern Cross, was indispensable. They didn't see just a cross, they saw Hanayakamalama, the Southern Cross, whose longer axis, when extended, pointed almost directly to the south celestial pole. Its angle in the sky could even be used to estimate latitude, telling them how far north or south they had traveled. This knowledge wasn't stored in books but embedded in the culture through chants, stories, and songs. These chants were mnemonic devices, perfectly crafted to preserve complex astronomical data across generations without a single written word, and the map extended beyond the stars themselves. The faint, glowing band of the Milky Way was not just a splash of light. To many cultures, it was a celestial river or a great road across the sky, providing a broad directional guide. The moon and planets also played their part. The moon's phases were a critical calendar, dictating not just the best times for planting or rituals, but also the tides and currents, which were another essential layer of the navigational puzzle. They understood that a full moon meant stronger spring tides, while a new moon meant weaker neap tides, information crucial for navigating tricky reef passages or anticipating the pull of a current. This was a holistic science, a symphony of interconnected knowledge where the stars, the moon, the waves, and the winds all played in concert. A navigator's mind was a living library of natural phenomena, constantly cross-referencing data from the heavens above with the feel of the ocean below. On a cloudy night when the primary map was hidden, this deep integration is what saved them. They could feel the swell patterns reflecting distant weather systems and islands. They could read subtle shifts in the wind on their skin, and they could steer by the feel of the canoe moving through the water, a skill known as dead reckoning that kept them on course until the stars once again broke through the clouds. This proves that their navigation was never reliant on a single tool. It was a resilient, multi-layered system of checks and balances, an empirical science of observation that was so refined it allowed them to pinpoint tiny, remote islands across thousands of miles of open ocean with a precision that still astounds modern sailors. While the stars provided a celestial map and the birds offered signs of land, the ocean itself held another, more constant guide, the wind. To ancient mariners, wind was never merely weather. It was geography in motion, a powerful and predictable force that carved invisible highways across the seas. They came to understand that the world's winds followed grand, seasonal patterns, turning the seemingly chaotic atmosphere into a structured system of routes and schedules. This profound knowledge of aerology, the study of winds, transformed the open ocean from a terrifying barrier into a connective tissue between cultures. In the vast Pacific, this understanding reached its zenith. Polynesian navigators knew the trade winds intimately. These persistent breezes blow reliably from the northeast in the northern hemisphere and from the southeast in the southern hemisphere, converging near the equator. This created a giant natural conveyor belt across the ocean. A voyager setting out from the Marquesas Islands, for instance, could catch the southeast trade wind and ride it northwestward, a journey that might eventually bring them within the sphere of the Hawaiian Islands. The return voyage utilized different seasonal shifts, demonstrating that their navigation was never a one-way trip into the unknown, but a calculated use of a round-trip meteorological system. Their forecasting skills were so refined that by observing subtle signs, the texture of the clouds, the hint of humidity in the air, the specific behavior of waves, they could predict major weather changes weeks in advance, allowing them to avoid storms or capitalize on favorable conditions. This mastery was not unique to the Pacific. In the ancient Mediterranean, Greek mariners documented the Etesian winds, which blow consistently from the north during the summer months. These winds were a vital part of their maritime calendar, essentially opening the sea for travel and trade between Egypt, Greece, and Asia Minor during the calmest season. The philosopher Aristotle himself wrote about these winds, noting their reliability for sea travel. This shared knowledge meant that a ship captain in Athens could plan a journey to Alexandria with a high degree of confidence about the conditions he would face, knowing the Etesian winds would fill his sails and push him south. The wind was so integral to their world that they personified it. The anemoi were the Greek wind gods, each representing a cardinal direction. Boreas was the north wind, Notos the south, Euros the east, and Zephyrus the gentle west wind. This wasn't just poetry, it was a functional classification system. By giving the winds divine names and attributes, the knowledge of their directions and characters was embedded into the culture's stories and lessons, ensuring every sailor understood the nature of the force they were harnessing. But how did a navigator actually use this force hour by hour, especially on an overcast night when both stars and birds were absent? They became one with their environment, reading cues that are imperceptible to most of us. They felt the wind's direction not just on their face, but on their skin, their ears, and even the hairs on their arms, sensing slight shifts that indicated a change in course or an approaching weather system. They watched the movement of clouds, knowing that low, fast-moving clouds could indicate wind direction higher up, sometimes signaling a change before it reached the sea surface. Most importantly, they read the ocean swells. Even when the local wind died down, great, deep ocean swells generated by distant weather systems continued to roll across the sea. A master navigator could lie down in the bottom of the canoe, eyes closed, and feel the direction and rhythm of these swells through the hull's movement. By aligning the canoe's motion with the dominant swell pattern, he could maintain a true course for days without a single visual landmark. This technique allowed for intentional indirect sailing. They often wouldn't sail directly toward a target island if the wind was against it. Instead, they would sail at an angle or beam reach, using the wind's power most efficiently, knowing they could correct their course later or use a different swell pattern to guide them home. This was the ultimate expression of their skill, not fighting nature but collaborating with it, using the invisible map of the wind to weave a course across the planet's greatest expanses. This deep, intuitive reading of the environment extended far beyond mythology into the practical, minute-by-minute observation of animal behavior. For a sailor on the open water, the sight of a bird was never just a welcome break from the monotony of the sea. It was a data point, a vital clue that could be interpreted with stunning precision. They understood that different bird species were essentially specialized instruments, each with its own maximum range and predictable habits. Take the sooty tern, for instance. These birds are true ocean wanderers, but they possess a crucial limitation. They cannot land on the water. They must return to solid ground. So, when a navigator spotted a sooty tern in the late afternoon, flying with a sense of purpose, its beak often pointing in a specific direction, it wasn't a guess that land was near, it was a near certainty. The bird was on its evening commute home. Following its flight path became a reliable bearing, an arrow drawn in the sky pointing toward an island still well below the horizon. Similarly, the brown noddy, another common tropical seabird, behaves in much the same way, flying out to fishing grounds at dawn and returning to its roosting colonies on remote atolls at dusk. This knowledge was incredibly specific. The magnificent frigatebird, with its massive wingspan and deeply forked tail, is another powerful indicator. These birds can soar for weeks without touching land, but they have a particular behavior. They often harass other birds to steal their catch. A navigator wouldn't just see a frigatebird, he would watch its activity. A frigatebird flying high and in a straight line might simply be traveling, but one that was circling, diving, or actively pursuing other birds was almost certainly within a crucial radius of its nest, telling the sailor that land was likely within a range of 50 to 100 miles. This wasn't casual observation. It was a rigorous science of ornithology developed through generations of trial and error, success and tragedy. Navigators learned to identify species not just by sight, but by the sound of their calls carried on the wind and by the very rhythm of their wing beats against the vast sky. This principle of using birds as guides was a global phenomenon adapted to the unique challenges of each environment. In the harsh, ice-choked waters of the Arctic, where the sun can disappear for months and the horizon is a blinding white expanse, indigenous Inuit and other northern peoples relied on birds like the thick-billed murre and the Atlantic puffin. These birds, or auks, were not signs of distant land in the same way because the land was often treacherous ice. Instead, their behavior indicated the location of open water leads or polynyas within the ice pack. These leads were the vital highways for travel and hunting. A flock of auks flying low and steadily in one direction was a clear signal that they were heading to or from a patch of open water, allowing a hunter in a kayak or a numiak to follow them to safety and productive hunting grounds. The birds' flight paths became dynamic maps of the ever-shifting icy seascape. The most skilled navigators took this even further, developing an almost subconscious understanding of avian cues. They knew that birds flying high often meant land was closer, as they were perhaps making shorter, more direct flights from their nests. The direction of a bird's arrival or departure relative to the swell could indicate whether an island was upwind or downwind. They could even interpret the types of fish remnants around a bird's nesting site to understand the currents and fishing grounds near a newly found island. This was a holistic system where every piece of information was cross-referenced. The flight of a bird was never read in isolation. It was combined with the feel of the swell against the canoe hull, the taste of the air, the pattern of the clouds, and the position of the stars. This integration of natural signs created a robust and redundant navigation system. If clouds obscured the stars, the birds could guide them. If no birds were present, the swell could keep them on course. This multi-layered approach showcases a profound synergy between human intuition and the wisdom of the natural world, a dialogue between sailor and environment that allowed humanity to conquer the greatest wilderness on Earth long before the invention of any mechanical tool. This mental model of the sky, the Polynesian star compass, represents one of humanity's most elegant and sophisticated intellectual achievements. It wasn't a physical object you could hold. It was a complete conceptual framework etched into the mind of the navigator, a living, breathing map that transformed the entire celestial sphere into a precise navigational instrument. Imagine standing on the deck of a voyaging canoe, the center of your own universe. The horizon all around you is mentally divided into 32 equal segments, like the points of a compass rose, but these are called houses. Each house is not just an abstract direction, it is the home of specific stars and constellations, each with its own name, story, and path. When the star known as Hokulea, what we call Arcturus, rose directly in one of these houses, it wasn't just a beautiful sight, it meant you were on the correct path to the Hawaiian Islands. This system provided a constant, unwavering frame of reference. A navigator didn't need to know every star in the sky at once. He needed to know which key star was rising or setting in which house at any given time of night and any time of year. His mental star compass allowed him to do just that, creating a stable grid over the seemingly chaotic movement of the heavens. The precision of this knowledge was breathtaking. Take Hokulea, the North Star. For Polynesian voyagers who sailed primarily in the tropical Pacific, Hokulea sat low on the northern horizon. Its fixed position meant it always indicated true north, a celestial anchor point around which all other stars appeared to rotate. But the star compass was far more dynamic than a single anchor. It incorporated the entire journey of stars across the sky. The brilliant star Hygienea, our Sirius, was another critical marker. Its sharp, precise rising in the east was a definitive signal, a clear-cut starting point for orienting the entire mental map for that night's journey. The navigator would then track the progression of other stars as they rose from their specific houses, traveled in their archi across the dome of the sky, and set in their corresponding houses on the opposite horizon. This created a continuous cycle of celestial guidance throughout the entire night. This system's true genius was its resilience and redundancy. Clouds might obscure the primary guiding star, but a master navigator didn't panic. He simply waited for another star to emerge from a known house. If he knew that a certain constellation should be rising in the house called La at a particular time, and he saw it there even briefly, he could instantly recalibrate his sense of direction. This wasn't guesswork, it was the application of a deeply memorized sequence, a celestial clockwork he knew by heart. Furthermore, they understood star paths. This advanced concept involved using the altitude of a star above the horizon to determine latitude. As a voyager sailed north or south, the height of certain stars would change. For example, the Southern Cross, or Hanayakamalama, rotates around the south celestial pole. By memorizing the exact angle its longer axis made with the horizon when directly over a specific island, a navigator could sail until that star reached that exact position, knowing he had arrived at the correct latitude. He would then turn east or west and sail along that latitude, a technique called latitude sailing, until other signs like bird behavior or cloud formations indicated the island was near. This immense body of knowledge wasn't acquired overnight. It was a lifelong discipline that began in early childhood. Young apprentices, often from navigator lineages, learned not through dry lectures but through immersive storytelling and chants. These chants were masterpieces of information design, intricately woven with genealogies, mythologies, and hidden within them precise astronomical data. A chant might tell the story of a great hero's journey, but embedded within the poetic metaphors were the names of stars, the sequences of their rising, and the directions to specific islands. This oral tradition was a highly effective mnemonic technology, ensuring that complex, life-saving information was preserved verbatim across generations without a single written word. The rhythm and melody made the data unforgettable, turning a navigator's mind into a living library of the Pacific. The star compass, therefore, was far more than a tool. It was the crystallized intelligence of a culture, a perfect fusion of keen observation, rigorous science, and profound cultural wisdom that enabled one of the most remarkable periods of exploration in human history. This mastery of the wind was not a passive acceptance of nature's whims but an active, strategic partnership. The Pacific Ocean, far from being a trackless void, is crisscrossed by powerful, predictable highways of air and water. The most famous of these are the trade winds, steady breezes that blow from the northeast in the northern hemisphere and from the southeast south of the equator. For a navigator setting out from Tonga or Samoa, these winds were a gift, a consistent force at their back pushing them steadily toward the islands of central and eastern Polynesia. They understood these were seasonal patterns, and voyage planning was a matter of exquisite timing. They would wait for the time of year when the trades were strongest and most reliable to make the long journey to places like the Tuamotu Archipelago or the Society Islands. This wasn't a hopeful drift, it was a scheduled departure on a known route, a maritime commute using the atmosphere's own timetable. But the ocean's currents provided another layer of complexity and opportunity. The Great Equatorial Countercurrent, for example, flows eastward, a river within the sea running against the general westward flow of the South Equatorial Current. A navigator aware of this could use it to his advantage, catching a free ride back toward the east after exploring western islands. This knowledge was absolutely critical because these currents also represented a constant, invisible force trying to push a canoe off course. A vessel might be pointed directly toward its target, but a strong current running perpendicular to its path could be carrying it sideways without anyone on board realizing it. This is where their profound understanding of wave patterns came in. They could read the ocean's surface like a page of text, the dominant swell generated by distant weather systems acted as a constant directional baseline. By feeling the canoe's motion relative to this primary swell, a navigator could detect the subtle influence of a current. If the canoe began to slide diagonally across the swells instead of riding up and down them directly, it was a clear sign of being pushed by a cross-current, and he would correct the steering to compensate, maintaining his true heading over the ground below. Their environmental awareness extended even to the sky, where clouds served as a dynamic bulletin board broadcasting information about the seascape below. A lone, puffy cumulus cloud standing steadfast in an otherwise clear sky was often more than just a cloud. It was a beacon. Islands absorb heat from the sun much more effectively than the surrounding ocean. This warming air rises, creating convective currents that lead to cloud formation directly overhead. A navigator seeing a stationary cumulus cloud on the horizon knew it was likely anchored to an island, even if that island was still beyond the curvature of the Earth. The type and color of the clouds could offer further clues. A greenish tint might reflect the lagoon of an atoll, while a more generalized, low bank of clouds could indicate a larger high island. They also learned to interpret the patterns of cloud streams, the distortion of trade wind clouds as they interacted with the peaks of a volcanic island could create a visible pattern that extended downwind, like a banner pointing toward land. This holistic synthesis of information, wind direction, swell feel, current drift, and cloud interpretation created a navigational system with built-in redundancy. If one signal was absent, two others could confirm the course. This multi-layered approach completely shatters the outdated notion that these voyages were accidents, that canoes were simply blown off course and stumbled upon islands by pure luck. The evidence lies in the deliberate patterns of settlement. The peopling of the Pacific was a methodical, expansionary process that moved against the prevailing winds and currents as often as it moved with them. Journeying from Tahiti to Hawaii, for instance, meant sailing north, well out of the trade wind belt, into the region of the westerlies to make the return trip. This was intentional, calculated exploration, a testament to a culture that didn't just ride the ocean's highways but learned all its side streets and secret paths as well. This intricate knowledge of the natural world, this living science of wind, wave, and star, was far too precious to be left to chance or simple memorization of lists. Its survival across countless generations required a vessel as durable as the finest voyaging canoe, and that vessel was myth. The great stories of gods and heroes, of epic battles and magical feats, were not mere entertainment around the evening fire. They were the primary technology for data storage in an oral culture. They were sophisticated navigation manuals disguised as fantasy, ensuring that a young apprentice learned the rising point of a crucial star not through rote repetition, but by remembering the exact spot where a goddess first set foot on Earth. This fusion of the practical and the spiritual created a system of knowledge transmission that was both incredibly resilient and deeply beautiful. Consider the widespread Polynesian legend of the demigod Moi. In the most famous version, Moi uses his magical fishhook, Manaiakalani, to haul the Hawaiian Islands up from the depths of the ocean. On the surface, it's a thrilling creation story. But to a navigator, this myth is a layered technical allegory. The magical hook is a direct metaphor for the constellation of stars we know as Scorpius. In Hawaii, the curve of Scorpius, with the bright star Antares at its heart, appears to rise from the southeastern horizon and hook the sky. The legend of Moi fishing up the islands encodes a vital piece of information. When the hook of Scorpius is in a specific position in the night sky, it is pointing the way toward the Hawaiian archipelago. The story doesn't just tell you that Scorpius is important, it tells you how to use it. It transforms an abstract astronomical concept into a vivid, unforgettable image, a god fishing for land with a constellation. This made the information accessible to everyone, from the seasoned master to the youngest child listening to the story, planting the seeds of wayfinding long before they ever stepped into a canoe. This practice of encoding the environment into story was a global phenomenon perfectly adapted to local needs. For the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, the night sky was not a distant realm of pinprick lights, but a continuous landscape, a celestial reflection of their earthly world. Their stories describe the emu in the sky, a vast dark constellation not made of stars, but of the opaque dust clouds within our own Milky Way galaxy. To see it, you must look at the black spaces between the stars. During certain seasons, this cosmic emu appears to be running across the heavens, its posture and orientation changing throughout the year. The Dreamtime stories connected to this emu are multifaceted navigational and ecological manuals. The direction the emu is facing could indicate a direction of travel for seasonal migrations. More precisely, its appearance coincides with the time when real emus on Earth are laying their eggs, a crucial seasonal food source. The story thus seamlessly links a celestial marker with a terrestrial event, dictating when and where to travel to find sustenance. It's a brilliant, holistic system that connects the heavens above to the rhythms of life below. These mythological narratives functioned as powerful mnemonic devices, memory aids that are far more effective than simple facts. The human brain is wired to remember stories, characters, and emotions far better than it remembers disconnected data points. A list of star coordinates is easily forgotten. The epic tale of a hero's journey using those same stars to save his people is unforgettable. The rhythm, rhyme, and repetition found in many oral chants further cemented this knowledge. In the Caroline Islands of Micronesia, navigators learned a complex system of star courses through endless recitation of sailings, which were essentially rhythmic poems. These poems didn't sound like technical manuals. They wove together star paths, island names, and sea marks into a flowing, almost hypnotic narrative. By chanting these stories, a navigator was not just memorizing, he was mentally rehearsing the entire voyage, feeling the rhythm of the swells and seeing the procession of the stars in his mind's eye long before the voyage began. By analyzing these ancient myths with a navigator's eye, we are essentially reverse engineering a lost science. We can look at a story and begin to ask new questions. Why does this goddess always appear from a specific direction? Why is this animal associated with that particular season? The answers often reveal a deep understanding of natural patterns. This reveals that for these ancient cultures, there was no separation between the spiritual and the scientific, the sacred and the practical. The world was a unified, intelligent system, and their stories honored that complexity. The divinity of a bird god ensured that the observation of its flight patterns was treated with reverence and precision. The epic tale of a constellation ensured that its navigational application was passed down intact. This blending of story and science created a knowledge system that was not only functional but also meaningful, connecting every successful voyage to the grand, cosmic stories of their ancestors, turning every navigator into both a scientist and a keeper of the sacred. This profound reliance on the natural world extended its logic to the grand, seasonal movements of birds, transforming their migrations into a living, breathing calendar and a dynamic route map for human exploration. Ancient navigators didn't just see birds as momentary signs. They understood them as participants in a vast annual cycle, and by aligning their own voyages with this cycle, they tapped into a deep ecological intelligence. The predictable journeys of migratory species like cranes, geese, and shorebirds provided a temporal framework, marking the beginning and end of safe sailing seasons with a reliability that rivaled any human-made instrument. In the Mediterranean, for instance, the mass exodus of swallows southward in the autumn was a clear signal. For sailors, this wasn't just a beautiful natural spectacle, it was a critical meteorological bulletin. The swallows were fleeing the coming winter storms and unfavorable northerly winds, indicating that the fair, stable weather of summer was truly over. Their movement south toward the coast of North Africa also subtly charted a course, suggesting a viable, seasonal pathway across the sea that avoided the treacherous weather brewing in the north. This concept was amplified to an even greater degree in the vastness of the Pacific. Here, the arrival of specific seabirds didn't just point to static land, it announced the opening of a navigational window. The return of certain terns or petrels to their nesting grounds on particular islands was a perfectly timed event, synchronized with the shift in wind patterns and the calming of seas. A master navigator would know that the appearance of the Monu-o-ku white tern in great numbers around the northwestern Hawaiian Islands signaled the strengthening of the trade winds, perfect for launching a long voyage southward. Their migration was a green light, a natural confirmation that the conditions were optimal. The birds had done the reconnaissance, the humans simply had to read their message and follow. Perhaps the most brilliant application of this knowledge was in the deliberate emulation of avian flyways. Migratory birds don't travel at random, they follow ancient, energy-efficient highways in the sky, often tracing coastlines, island chains, or even mountain ranges that provide landmarks and uplift. These aerial corridors, etched into the planet by countless generations of wings, presented pre-planned routes for mariners. A sailor looking at a flock of geese flying in a steady, determined V formation toward a distant headland wasn't just watching birds, he was looking at a recommended course plotted by experts. By sailing parallel to these flyways, or using the chain of islands the birds hopped between as waypoints, navigators could dramatically reduce the risk of the open ocean. They were effectively using the birds' innate knowledge of geography, gained over millennia of evolution, to fill in the blanks on their own mental charts. This relationship reached its most active and dramatic form with the ancient Norse, those formidable voyagers of the North Atlantic. Their sagas recount a fascinating and pragmatic technique. They carried ravens on their ships. When the skies were shrouded in fog and the sea offered no clues, when even the most seasoned sailor was lost in a featureless gray void, they would release one of these intelligent birds. The Norse understood a fundamental truth about ravens: they are not truly seabirds. A raven released from a ship would instinctively fly upward, circling high to gain a panoramic view. If it saw no land, it would often return to the familiar, if confining, perch of the ship. But if it spotted even the faintest smudge of land on the horizon, it would fly straight and purposefully toward it, its black form becoming an arrow against the sky. The sailors would then simply alter their course to follow the bird's line of flight. This was not blind faith in an animal. It was the strategic use of a superior biological tool, the raven's keen eyesight and powerful homing instinct, to extend the human senses far beyond their natural limits. It was a breathtakingly simple and effective form of bio-navigation. This intricate symbiosis reveals a world utterly different from our modern one. Prehistoric peoples did not see themselves as separate from nature, conquering a wild and untamable world. Instead, they saw themselves as one thread woven into a larger ecological network. They understood that to survive and explore, they needed to listen to the other members of that network, to learn their schedules and their pathways. The migratory patterns of birds were not just a phenomenon to be observed with curiosity. They were a guide to be actively followed, a collaborative partnership between species. By integrating this knowledge into their voyage planning, they transformed the immense, terrifying risk of ocean exploration into a calculated endeavor, using the oldest and most reliable maps in the world, those written in the stars, the waves, and the timeless journey of wings. While the fixed stars formed the unwavering grid of their celestial map, the heavens offered other, more dynamic lights that a skilled navigator learned to read with equal precision. The brilliant wanderers of the sky, the planets, were not chaotic or unpredictable to these ancient astronomers. They were powerful, supplementary guides with their own reliable rhythms. Chief among them was Venus, known across Polynesia as Hokuloa, the long star, for the distinctive, elongated trail its intense light could cast upon the ocean's surface. Its predictable cycle made it indispensable. For months at a time, Venus would dominate the eastern horizon just before dawn, a blazing herald of the coming sun. Then, after disappearing from view, it would reappear in the western sky, shining brilliantly after sunset. This reliable pattern made it a superb directional marker. When Hokuloa hung in the pre-dawn east, it provided a steady bearing for voyages launched at first light. When it glowed in the evening west, it offered a final reference point as the last stars of the navigational clock began to appear. Its sheer brightness also made it one of the first celestial bodies visible in the twilight and one of the last to fade at dawn, effectively extending the usable window for star-based navigation. But the Navigator's celestial toolbox extended even to the most transient and awe-inspiring phenomena. Comets, with their spectacular, unexpected appearances, were rarely dismissed as mere superstition. While they were often interpreted within a cultural framework as omens or messages from the ancestors, they were also analyzed with a practical navigator's eye. The core of a comet's value lay in its consistency. Unlike a shooting star that flashes and dies in an instant, a great comet remains visible for weeks, moving in a slow, stately, and most importantly, predictable arc across the dome of the sky. A master wayfinder would observe its path with intense interest, noting its trajectory relative to the fixed houses of his star compass. There are oral histories that suggest the appearance of a particularly bright comet, with its tail stretching across specific constellations, was sometimes interpreted as a celestial finger pointing toward a new land or a new pathway to be explored, adding a layer of spiritual impetus to the constant human drive for discovery. This pragmatic use of atmospheric light reached its most dramatic expression in the far north, where Inuit and other Arctic peoples faced a navigational challenge unlike any other: the long, sunless winter. Here, the aurora borealis, or northern lights, was far more than a beautiful curtain of color dancing in the sky. On the darkest nights, the glow of the aurora could be surprisingly bright, casting a faint, ethereal light over the immense, treacherous landscape of sea ice. This illumination was crucial. It could reveal the subtle texture of the ice, highlighting the darker, smoother lines of stable old ice versus the jagged, broken white of dangerous pressure ridges or newly formed, thin ice that could collapse underfoot. Navigators traveling by kayak or dogsled would use the aurora's glow to identify the leads, those critical fractures of open water that served as hunting grounds and travel routes through the frozen seascape. The light of the aurora reflecting off the open water of a lead created a different sheen than its light reflecting off snow-covered ice, providing a vital visual contrast in the overwhelming monochrome of the Arctic night. Furthermore, the aurora often displays a broad, arch-like structure that can align roughly east to west. While not as precise as a star, this general alignment could offer a secondary reference for maintaining direction when the sky was overcast and every other celestial marker was hidden. This incredible adaptability, this willingness and ability to use every single point of light, whether fixed, wandering, or atmospheric, reveals the true depth of prehistoric navigation. It was never a rigid system reliant on a single perfect condition. It was a dynamic, resilient, and deeply intelligent practice of environmental integration. If clouds obscured the stars, the navigator could wait for the moon or a planet to break through. If the night was completely overcast, he could rely on the swell and the wind. And in the most extreme environments, even the ghostly light of the aurora could become a tool for survival. This holistic approach meant they were never truly lost, only waiting for the next sign to reveal itself. Their map was the entire world, constantly speaking to those who knew how to listen, ensuring that no matter how dark the night or how featureless the sea, there was always a light to guide the way. Beyond the guidance of birds and stars, the most constant and intimate dialogue between navigator and nature happened not by looking up, but by feeling the very motion of the canoe itself. This profound skill, known as wave piloting, transformed the chaotic surface of the ocean into a structured language of swells, a tactile map that could be read through the hull and felt in the bones. For a master navigator, the ocean was never a flat, monotonous plain. It was a complex, pulsing landscape of energy traveling across vast distances. The largest and most reliable of these were the deep ocean swells, generated by massive weather systems and planetary wind patterns thousands of miles away. These swells were the navigator's true north, the unwavering baseline against which all other movements were measured. A navigator from the Marshall Islands, for example, would know the dominant direction of the great swells for his region as intimately as a city dweller knows the main avenues of his hometown. By aligning the canoe's motion with the rhythm of this primary swell, he could maintain a straight course for days on end without a single glimpse of the sun or stars, his body acting as a living compass. The true magic of wave piloting, however, lay in interpreting the disruptions to this steady rhythm. An island rising from the seabed acts like a rock in a stream, interrupting the flow of ocean energy. As the deep water swells encounter an island, they bend around it, a process known as refraction, and they also bounce off its shores, creating a new set of smaller, reflected waves moving outward. This interaction creates a unique and complex interference pattern in the water, a signature that is unique to that specific island and its underwater topography. A skilled navigator could feel this pattern through the gentle rocking and rolling of the canoe. He might detect a slight hesitation in the motion, a subtle cross swell that shouldn't be there, or a brief period of confused, jumbled water. This was the ocean whispering that land was near, even if it remained 50 or 100 miles beyond the visible horizon. By analyzing the angle and frequency of these secondary wave patterns, he could not only confirm the presence of land but also deduce its general direction. This was not a vague feeling. It was a precise science of hydrodynamics developed through generations of observation and experience. This sensory reading of the sea extended to the most immediate dangers and opportunities. The color and texture of the water provided a continuous visual feed of information. Out in the deep abyssal plain, the water appears a profound, dark navy blue, almost black, because there is nothing for the light to reflect off of except the immense depth. But as one approaches the shallow platform of an island or a coral atoll, the seafloor rises and the water takes on a lighter, brighter hue. A navigator watching the colors shift from that deep navy to a vibrant azure and finally to a greenish or even brownish tint over a reef knew he was entering the island's sphere of influence. He might also see subtle patterns on the surface, dark, slick patches indicating deep water channels cutting through the reef, or bright, ruffled areas revealing shallow, dangerous coral heads just beneath the surface. In the lagoons of atolls, the navigator would read the wind lines on the water's surface to maintain his bearing, as the wind blowing across a confined body of water creates a predictable pattern of ripples that can be used much like a compass rose on a small inland lake. The ultimate expression of this skill was its use in total sensory deprivation. On a pitch-black, moonless night, when clouds blotted out every star and no visual cues remained, the navigator would often lie down in the bottom of the canoe, close his eyes, and place his entire focus on the vessel's movement. With his visual sense neutralized, his tactile and vestibular senses became hyper-aware. He could feel the long, deep roll of the primary swell lifting the canoe and setting it down again in a steady, predictable rhythm. He could feel the smaller, sharper chop of a local wind wave superimposed on top of it. And most importantly, he could feel the faintest tremor, the slightest cross-grain vibration that signaled a distant island's reflected energy or the pull of a strong current trying to push the canoe off its intended path. His entire body became a finely tuned seismograph, registering the ocean's slightest whispers. This intimate, physical connection to the sea underscores a fundamental truth about these explorers. They did not conquer the ocean, they conversed with it. They listened to its rhythms, respected its power, and learned to read its most subtle signs, turning the greatest wilderness on Earth into a familiar and navigable home. This vast and intricate body of knowledge, this living science of the sea and stars, faced a monumental challenge: how to survive. Without a single written word, how could such complex information be perfectly preserved across centuries, passed from one generation to the next without being diluted, corrupted, or lost to time? The answer lies in one of humanity's most sophisticated and beautiful systems of cultural transmission, a holistic educational model where knowledge was not merely taught but lived, breathed, and woven into the very soul of the community. It was a sacred trust, and its preservation was treated with the utmost gravity and reverence. At the heart of this system was the master-apprentice relationship. In the Caroline Islands of Micronesia, a young boy chosen to become a polu, or navigator, would be sent to live with a master, often a relative, beginning a decades-long journey of learning. This was not a casual education. It was an all-consuming discipline that shaped his entire being. The training began not on the open ocean, but on solid ground. The master would take his student to a secluded part of the beach or a special teaching hut, and there they would begin with the star compass. The apprentice would have to memorize the rising and setting points of hundreds of stars for every season, not as abstract points of light, but as a dynamic, rotating map. He learned to chant the names of the stars and the islands they pointed toward, the rhythms of the chant itself mirroring the rhythm of the waves, making the information unforgettable. This ground school extended to the famous stick charts. These were not charts to be taken on a voyage. They were teaching tools, intricate sculptures made from the midribs of palm fronds tied together with coconut fiber, with small shells or coral pebbles representing islands. The curved and straight sticks did not represent literal ocean routes. They represented the complex refraction patterns of swells as they interacted with islands. A student would sit for hours running his hands over these charts, feeling the intersections of the sticks, learning to interpret the wave interference patterns they symbolized. He was learning to feel with his mind what he would later need to feel with his body in the canoe. This tactile, visual learning was complemented by intense mental visualization. The master would describe a voyage from one island to another, and the apprentice had to visualize the entire journey in his mind. The stars that would rise and set, the changes in swell patterns, the bird life he would encounter, the number of days it would take. This mental rehearsal was considered just as important as physical practice. The knowledge was further encoded and safeguarded through ceremony and ritual. In Fiji, the preparation and drinking of kava, a ceremonial drink made from the root of the pepper plant, was a central part of community life. During these rituals, elders would recite the vanua, the stories of the land and the people. Woven into these epic narratives were the histories of great voyages, the names of ancestral navigators, and the descriptions of the seaways they discovered. A listener might hear a thrilling story of a hero battling a sea monster, but embedded within that story was crucial data about a particular current that ran strong near a specific island chain. The sacred nature of the ceremony ensured the stories were told with perfect accuracy, and the social context made the learning a shared, communal experience, binding the entire village to the knowledge, not just a single navigator. This holistic approach meant that navigation was never just a technical skill. It was a pillar of cultural identity. A master navigator was one of the most respected members of society because he held the knowledge that ensured the community's survival, connection, and prosperity. He was a living library, a scientist, a priest, and a historian all at once. The system was incredibly effective. It allowed for the accumulation of knowledge over generations. A master might teach the routes he knew, but he would also share the stories of his own grandfather's discovery of a new island, adding that new pathway to the collective memory. This is how the map of the Pacific was built, not by a single explorer, but by centuries of shared exploration, with each success and failure carefully recorded in story and song. This robust oral tradition is the very reason this ancient wisdom did not vanish entirely under the pressures of colonialism and modernization. Though the practice dwindled, the chants, the stories, and the teachings were kept alive in the memories of elders, waiting for the cultural renaissance that would see the building of new voyaging canoes and a new generation of navigators reclaiming their birthright and once again sailing by the stars. This profound reliance on avian guidance was not an isolated phenomenon, but a universal thread woven through the spiritual fabric of cultures across the globe, each interpreting the flight of birds through the lens of their own environment and needs. Far from being arbitrary inventions, these bird gods and their associated myths were profound reflections of shared human experience, a collective acknowledgement that birds held secrets to survival, direction, and the very nature of the world itself. When we place these traditions side by side, a stunning pattern emerges, revealing how different peoples, separated by vast oceans and continents, arrived at strikingly similar conclusions about the divine nature of winged creatures. Consider the formidable Vikings, those Norse explorers who braved the North Atlantic in their iconic longships. Their chief god, Odin, the All-Father, was a deity of wisdom, war, and poetry, but also of navigation and the hidden knowledge of the unseen world. His constant companions were two ravens, Hugin and Munin, whose names mean thought and memory. Each day, Odin would release these birds to fly across the 9 realms of Norse cosmology. They would return to him, perching on his shoulders to whisper all they had seen and heard. For a Viking sailor, this myth was a direct parallel to their own pragmatic practice. When lost in the featureless grey void of the sea and fog, they would release a raven from their ship. If the bird circled but returned, it signified no land was near. But if it flew off in a determined, straight line, the sailors would alter their course to follow it, trusting the raven's keen eyesight and homing instinct to lead them to safety. The myth of Odin's ravens was a sacred story that mirrored and sanctified a vital survival technique, blending the spiritual with the intensely practical. Across the Mediterranean, the ancient Greeks developed their own intricate relationships with avian guides, tailored to the specific challenges of their inland sea. They spoke of the halcyon, a mythical bird often associated with the kingfisher. According to legend, the halcyon would build its nest on the surface of the sea, and while it incubated its eggs, the gods would command the winds and waves to grow calm. This period of tranquility, known as the halcyon days, provided a vital window of safe passage for Greek sailors during the stormy winter months. This myth is a beautiful example of a culture encoding meteorological observation into a spiritual narrative. The nesting period of real kingfishers likely coincided with a known period of seasonal calm in the weather. By attributing this calm to the divine power of the bird, the myth ensured that sailors would respect this natural cycle and plan their voyages accordingly, turning an observable pattern into a sacred, unbreakable law of the sea. Venturing further east, Hindu tradition presents Garuda, a majestic, eagle-headed deity who serves as the mount of the god Vishnu. Garuda is depicted as immensely powerful and swift, capable of flying across the entire universe in the blink of an eye. He is a divine messenger, a carrier of prayers, and a being who effortlessly traverses the boundaries between the worlds of gods and humans. For a culture with vast inland expanses, the choice of a powerful raptor like an eagle as a divine guide makes perfect sense. Eagles soar to incredible heights, granting them a perspective far beyond human limitation. They see the big picture, the lay of the land, the path of rivers, the distant horizon. Garuda embodies this elevated, omniscient viewpoint. He represents the ability to see the ultimate destination and the most efficient path to get there, a concept just as crucial for a pilgrim crossing the Indian subcontinent as for a sailor crossing an ocean. His mythology reinforces the idea that navigation is about more than just physical direction. It is a spiritual journey toward a higher understanding. When we compare these traditions, the environmental influence becomes strikingly clear. Coastal and island cultures, like the Polynesians and the Greeks, naturally deified seabirds, the albatross, the tern, the kingfisher, creatures whose behaviors directly indicated the proximity of land or the state of the sea. Inland cultures, like the Norse and the Hindus, often focused on raptors and corvids, the raven and the eagle, birds known for their intelligence, their far-ranging flights over terrestrial landscapes, and their commanding views from great heights. These were not random choices but deliberate deifications of the most relevant and reliable natural indicators available in each environment. This global tapestry of avian divinity reveals a deep, innate human understanding that we are not separate from nature but a part of it. By watching the birds, our ancestors believed they were glimpsing the intentions of the gods themselves, learning to read a divine map written in the language of feathers and flight. These myths were humanity's first textbooks on ornithology and geography, ensuring that the life-saving knowledge of the natural world was preserved not in brittle scrolls, but in unforgettable stories that would be told and retold for generations. Yet for all their profound skill in reading the immediate environment, ancient navigators were also operating within a far grander, slower-moving force of nature, the climate itself. The very routes they sailed, the technologies they developed, and the timing of their greatest voyages were not just products of human ingenuity, but direct responses to a planet in constant flux. The story of prehistoric navigation is inextricably linked to the epic drama of climate change, where ice ages, shifting winds, and rising seas dictated the terms of exploration, opening some doors while slamming others shut. To truly appreciate their achievements, we must see them not as masters of a static world, but as agile adapters to an ever-changing one. Perhaps the most dramatic example of climate's hand in human migration is found in the frozen north. During the last glacial maximum, around 20,000 years ago, vast quantities of the world's water were locked up in massive continental ice sheets. This caused global sea levels to plummet, dropping by over 400 feet compared to today. In the Bering Strait, this sea level drop exposed a vast, sprawling bridge of land connecting Asia and North America, a region we now call Beringia. This was not a narrow, precarious crossing, but a wide, grassy plain hundreds of miles across, teeming with the mammoths, bison, and other game that migrating peoples followed. For these populations, the challenge wasn't advanced nautical navigation. It was terrestrial survival in a cold, new world. They walked into a continent, their path paved not by sophisticated star charts, but by a global deep freeze. Simultaneously, these lower sea levels created entirely new coastlines for other groups to explore. Vast stretches of continental shelf were exposed, meaning early voyagers in places like Southeast Asia or Australia could paddle along coasts that are now deep underwater, island hopping across distances that seem impossibly vast today because the gaps between landmasses were dramatically shorter. While ice ages created land bridges, the rhythmic pulse of the monsoon winds created a superhighway for maritime culture. In the Indian Ocean, the seasonal shift of the monsoon is a powerful, predictable engine. For roughly 6 months of the year, the winds blow steadily from the southwest, and for the other 6, they reverse direction, blowing from the northeast. Ancient mariners in the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal learned to harness this powerful natural rhythm with exquisite timing. A trader from ancient Rome's Egyptian territories, seeking the spices and silks of India, would set sail from a port like Berenice on the Red Sea in July. His ship would catch the southwest monsoon, which would fill its square sail and push it steadily eastward across the open ocean, a direct downwind run to the Malabar coast of India. After spending months trading and waiting for the wind to change, he would depart in January or February, catching the northeast monsoon to carry him and his valuable cargo back home. This wasn't a matter of battling the elements, it was a graceful, seasonal dance with them. The monsoon dictated the entire economic and cultural calendar, creating fixed windows for travel that connected civilizations across incredible distances. This reliance on seasonal winds was a global phenomenon. The same principle allowed Polynesian voyagers to plan their journeys across the Pacific, knowing that the strength and direction of the trade winds shifted in predictable ways throughout the year. But climate is not a fixed stage, it is a shifting landscape, and ancient navigators had to be master adapters. A change in global temperature or rainfall patterns could alter the very signs they relied upon. A prolonged drought in a bird's traditional nesting grounds might force it to establish new colonies hundreds of miles away, effectively erasing a critical navigational beacon for generations of sailors until their knowledge could be updated. Similarly, a major shift in prevailing wind patterns or ocean currents could render ancient sailing directions obsolete. A route that was a straightforward downwind sail for centuries might suddenly become an arduous upwind battle, or a current that once flowed helpfully toward an island might weaken or change course, leaving voyagers lost. This required a living, evolving knowledge system, one that could incorporate new observations and correct old assumptions. The survival of oral traditions wasn't just about preserving the past, it was about maintaining a flexible body of knowledge that could be refined by each generation based on their own experiences and the changes they witnessed in their environment. This pressure to adapt is vividly clear in North Africa. As the Sahara region grew progressively drier after the last ice age, what was once a vast savanna dotted with lakes became an immense and imposing desert. This drying process didn't just make life difficult, it pushed entire populations toward the remaining reliable sources of water, primarily the Nile River Valley and the Mediterranean coast. This concentration of people along shorelines became a powerful catalyst for maritime innovation. With resources scarce inland, the sea offered a new frontier. The need to travel, trade, and fish along the coast spurred the development of more sophisticated boats, better sailing techniques, and a deeper understanding of the Mediterranean's unique wind and current patterns. The brilliant maritime civilizations of the Phoenicians and Egyptians, in many ways, were born from the immense environmental pressure of a desert that was once a grassland. Their legendary navigational skills were in part a brilliant adaptation to a changing climate. Viewing the history of exploration through this climatic lens transforms our understanding. It shows us that the great chapters of human migration were not simply a steady, inevitable expansion of clever beings. They were a series of pulses and pauses, openings and closings, dictated by the Earth's climate. A navigational technique developed in one place at one time might not have been possible centuries earlier or later. The exposure of Beringia was a temporary geological event that allowed the peopling of the Americas. The reliable pulse of the monsoons was a climatic constant that enabled the fusion of cultures across the Indian Ocean. This perspective makes the accomplishments of ancient navigators even more remarkable. They possessed not only incredible skill and courage, but also a profound resilience. They were watching, learning, and adapting to a changing world, proving that the greatest navigation tool of all was the human capacity to innovate in the face of a planet in constant motion. This intricate dance with the climate and the stars ultimately served a purpose far greater than survival or exploration. It powered the very engine of early global commerce. The consistent, predictable wind patterns of our planet became the invisible highways upon which the first international trade networks were built, moving not just goods, but the very foundations of civilization itself. Long before the magnetic compass gave a definitive north or the sextant could measure the sun's angle, merchants and sailors were harnessing the grand, seasonal rhythms of the atmosphere to connect distant worlds. The most spectacular example of this is found in the Indian Ocean, a vast aquatic crossroads where the monsoon system dictated the entire rhythm of life and commerce. For ancient mariners from Arabia, East Africa, and India, the monsoon wasn't a weather pattern. It was a meticulously scheduled transit system. For roughly 6 months, the winds blow relentlessly from the southwest, and for the other 6, they reverse with equal reliability, blowing from the northeast. This created a perfect, predictable round-trip ticket across the open ocean. A merchant from the Swahili coast, laden with ivory, gold, and exotic woods, would wait for the arrival of the northeast monsoon. As those steady winds began to blow, he would set sail in his lateen-rigged dhow, a vessel perfectly designed to run with the wind. Catching this powerful breeze, his ship would make the long but direct journey across the Arabian Sea to the ports of Western India. There, he would trade his African treasures for spices, textiles, and gems, and then he would wait. He would wait for the wind to do its inevitable work, to shift direction as it always did. When the southwest monsoon began to blow months later, it was his signal to depart. That same wind that had brought him to India would now, reversed, carry him and his newfound riches directly back to the African coast. This wasn't a hopeful gamble. It was a scheduled maritime commute, a journey planned with a confidence that modern airlines would envy, all based on an intimate understanding of the wind's calendar. This model of wind-powered trade was mirrored in the Mediterranean, where the Phoenicians, history's first great maritime merchants, mastered their own local wind system. They relied on the Etesian winds, which blow consistently from the north during the summer months. These winds provided a reliable engine for their commercial empire. A Phoenician ship loaded with its famous exports vibrant purple dye extracted from murex snails, exquisite glassware, and strong, fragrant cedar wood from the forests of Lebanon could catch the Etesian winds and ride them south, down the coast of the Levant to Egypt, or west across the sea to Cyprus, Crete, and beyond. This network eventually stretched all the way to the distant shores of Spain and even beyond the Strait of Gibraltar, establishing trading posts that became the cities of Carthage and Cadiz. The wind ensured that their goods and their cultural influence could travel predictably across the known world. The cargo carried on these wind-borne routes was far more than mere commodities. They were the building blocks of culture and power. Egyptian pharaohs were buried in coffins made of Phoenician cedar. Roman emperors clothed themselves in Tyrian purple, a color so exclusive it became synonymous with royalty. Indian spices preserved food and transformed cuisines in Europe, while African gold fueled economies across the continent and beyond. But perhaps the most valuable cargo was intangible. These ships carried ideas, religions, technologies, and artistic styles. A single voyage could bring a new philosophy from Greece to Alexandria, a new mathematical concept from India to the Arab world, or a new architectural technique from Persia to East Africa. The dhow and the galley became the internet of the ancient world, a network for the exchange of knowledge that accelerated human progress. Port cities like Zanzibar, Hormuz, and Calicut became vibrant, cosmopolitan melting pots where languages, genes, and cultures mixed freely, all thanks to the predictable patterns of the wind. This immense economic value placed the navigator in a position of unprecedented importance. He was no longer just a skilled wayfinder. He was a vital corporate asset, the indispensable key to a kingdom's wealth. His knowledge of the wind's subtle nuances, knowing exactly when the monsoon would shift, how to navigate the tricky winds around a particular headland, or how to use a local sea breeze to enter a harbor, was proprietary information worth a fortune. Rivals would try to bribe him, kings would seek to employ him exclusively, and merchants would invest heavily in his training. This economic imperative acted as a powerful catalyst, driving the rapid refinement and formalization of navigational science. What began as oral tradition and instinctual knowledge started to be more carefully recorded, studied, and taught to selected apprentices. The need for reliable, repeatable commercial success turned the art of navigation into a more systematic science, all funded by the lucrative trade that the winds themselves made possible. In this way, the wind was indeed the engine of globalization, a force that woven together the destinies of disparate peoples millennia before container ships and jet planes, creating a connected and interdependent ancient world. Yet for all its ancient wisdom, this vast system of knowledge very nearly vanished forever. The arrival of European explorers with their compasses, astrolabes, and later GPS seemed to render these traditional ways obsolete. For a time, the old chants fell silent, and the intimate dialogue between sailor and sea was drowned out by the hum of modern technology. But in the mid-20th century, something remarkable began to stir, a powerful cultural revival determined to prove that this ancient art was not just a historical footnote, but a viable, profound science waiting to be reclaimed. This movement found its most powerful symbol in a canoe named Hoculaire, meaning Star of Joy. In 1976, this double-hulled voyaging canoe, a replica of the vessels that had first settled the Pacific, embarked on a journey that would change everything. Its mission was to sail from Hawaii to Tahiti, a distance of over 2,500 miles, using no modern instruments whatsoever, no compass, no sextant, and certainly no GPS. The entire voyage would rely solely on the ancient techniques of celestial navigation, wave piloting, and reading the signs of nature. The success of this daring voyage hinged on one man, PREHISTORIC, a master navigator from the small Micronesian island of Satawal. In his community, he was one of the last living Palu, trained from childhood in the old ways. He carried in his mind the complete star compass and a deep, physical understanding of the ocean's rhythms. To a skeptical modern world, the idea seemed impossible, a romantic but foolhardy fantasy. But Mao knew otherwise. For 33 days, he guided Hokula across the open ocean, never once doubting his position. He navigated by the sun by day and the stars by night. He felt the direction of the swells through the hull, and he watched the clouds and the birds. When Hokula arrived in Tahiti, it wasn't just a canoe reaching land. It was an entire culture rediscovering its soul. The welcoming crowd numbered in the thousands Tahitians who had come to witness what their own ancestors had achieved, an event that sparked an electric current of pride and possibility across Polynesia. The ripple effect of that single voyage was transformative. It ignited a cultural renaissance that continues to this day. Across the Pacific, from Aotearoa to Hawaii to the Marquesas, young people began building new voyaging canoes, learning the old chants and studying the star lore. Schools of navigation were established, ensuring that the knowledge PREHISTORIC carried would not die with him, but would be passed to a new generation. This wasn't just about relearning history, it was about reclaiming identity. For indigenous peoples whose histories had been marginalized, mastering the skills of their ancestors became a powerful act of self-determination, a tangible connection to a past that was sophisticated, scientific, and deeply heroic. The revival also captured the attention of the scientific community, leading to fascinating studies that began to quantify what traditional navigators had always known. Researchers found that these experts could indeed detect islands from over 100 miles away by interpreting subtle, stationary cloud formations and the specific flight patterns of seabirds returning to their nests, a level of environmental perception that often outperformed the capabilities of early European navigational instruments. This partnership between traditional knowledge and modern science has proven invaluable, offering insights into sustainable practices and a different way of interacting with our planet. The revival of traditional navigation shows us that this ancient practice is not a relic to be studied behind glass. It is a living, evolving discipline, a testament to human ingenuity that offers a compelling alternative to our technology-saturated lives, one based not on domination over nature, but on a profound and harmonious conversation with it. To fully grasp the genius of these ancient wayfinders, we must venture beyond the stars and the waves and into the very architecture of the human mind. The true instrument of navigation was not a tool you could hold. It was the navigator's own brain, a biological supercomputer trained through years of disciplined practice to perform feats of memory and spatial reasoning that seem almost superhuman to us today. These masters maintained a continuously updated, three-dimensional mental model of their entire journey, a cognitive map that integrated the constant movement of the stars overhead, the rhythmic pulse of the swells beneath the hull, the fleeting direction of a bird's flight, and the subtle shifts in wind on their skin. This was not a static picture but a dynamic, living simulation of their place in the vastness of the ocean, a simulation they could run and adjust in their mind's eye without a single external reference. This immense cognitive load was managed through a sophisticated form of mental calculus known as dead reckoning. From the moment they left sight of land, the navigator would begin estimating their position based on their estimated speed, the direction they were holding, and the amount of time that had passed. Imagine keeping a complex math problem running in your head for weeks at a time, constantly factoring in the push of a current trying to drift you off course or the slight change in heading caused by a shifting wind. Every hour, every day, this estimated position was updated, corrected, and refined by cross-referencing it with every available natural sign. If the stars said one thing but the feel of the swell said another, the navigator's mind would work to resolve the discrepancy, adjusting the mental model until everything aligned once more. This required an ironclad concentration, an ability to hold multiple streams of sensory data in working memory simultaneously and synthesize them into a single, coherent understanding of their location on the open ocean. The sheer volume of information required for this is staggering. We're not talking about memorizing a simple route. We're talking about an encyclopedic knowledge of hundreds of stars, their precise rising and setting points for different seasons, the distinct flight patterns and maximum ranges of dozens of bird species, the unique interference patterns that swells make when they interact with specific islands, and the feel of different ocean currents. To prevent this vast library of data from becoming a jumbled mess, cultures developed elegant organizational systems, primarily through the power of narrative. Complex information was not stored as dry facts but was woven into the fabric of stories, chants, and rituals. The legend of a hero's journey to a specific island wasn't just a myth. It was a mnemonic device that encoded the star path to follow, the bird to look for, and the number of days it should take. The rhythmic recitation of a chant during a ceremony reinforced the sequence of stars that would rise on a voyage to a particular archipelago. Storytelling provided a structure, an emotional hook, and a narrative flow that made the information impossible to forget, transforming raw data into a memorable epic. Modern neuroscience, through studying the brains of contemporary traditional navigators, is beginning to understand the profound impact this training has on the brain itself. Brain imaging studies suggest that this intense spatial training can enhance the hippocampus, a region critical for memory and navigation, and strengthen the neural pathways associated with spatial reasoning and mental rotation. These navigators aren't just thinking differently, their brains may be physically structured differently by a lifetime of this intense cognitive practice. They exhibit an almost preternatural ability to maintain orientation and a sense of direction that feels like a sixth sense to outsiders. This highlights a crucial concept. Our cognitive abilities are not fixed at birth but are profoundly shaped by our culture and what our environment demands of us. The brain of a master navigator is a testament to neuroplasticity, demonstrating how a specific cultural practice can cultivate a specialized and extraordinary form of intelligence. This deep understanding of ancient cognitive skills does more than just deepen our historical appreciation. It offers a powerful mirror to our modern, technology-dependent world. In an age where we willingly outsource our sense of direction to the calm voice of a GPS unit, we may be inadvertently allowing our innate navigational capacities to atrophy. We trade the cognitive engagement of building our own mental map for the passive reception of turn-by-turn instructions. The practices of these ancient mariners remind us of the incredible potential that lies in training our attention, honing our observation skills, and learning to read the natural world directly. Their legacy is not merely a historical curiosity but a challenge and invitation to re-engage with our environment and rediscover the profound capabilities of our own minds, capabilities that were once the key to exploring the planet. This profound connection between the heavens and human culture forms the very heart of a fascinating field known as ethnoastronomy. This isn't just the study of ancient stargazing. It's the cultural study of sky knowledge, revealing how different societies understood, interpreted, and integrated celestial phenomena into every facet of their existence. For these cultures, the night sky was far more than a beautiful scattering of lights. It was a dynamic, living text, a divine clock, and a sacred calendar, all woven together into a single, coherent cosmic worldview. Navigation, as incredible as it was, represented just one single chapter in this vast, interconnected library of knowledge. The true depth of their understanding is revealed when we see how they used the same stars that guided their canoes to also dictate their harvests, inspire their architecture, and shape their most profound spiritual beliefs. Consider the sophisticated Maya civilization of Mesoamerica. To them, the planet Venus was not merely a bright evening star. It was Kukulkan, a powerful deity intimately associated with both warfare and the life-giving rains essential for agriculture. Maya astronomer priests tracked the complex cycles of Venus with breathtaking precision, creating detailed codices that charted its appearances as the morning and evening star over a period of 584 days. But this wasn't an abstract scientific exercise. The movements of this celestial god directly dictated the rhythm of their society. The first appearance of Venus as the morning star after a period of invisibility was considered an inauspicious and dangerous time, often leading to rituals to protect against evil. Its position in the sky could determine the timing of military campaigns, as they believed Kukulkan's influence could bring victory in battle. Simultaneously, its cycles were synchronized with the solar year, providing a reliable schedule for planting and harvesting maize, the cornerstone of their sustenance and culture. For the Maya, a single celestial body was a unified symbol, connecting the actions of warriors in the field to the work of farmers and the prayers of priests in a seamless cosmological whole. On the other side of the world, Aboriginal Australian cultures developed their own profoundly rich astronomical traditions, where the sky is not a separate realm but a continuation of the earthly landscape below. They speak of the emu in the sky, a constellation not made of stars, but of the dark patches of interstellar dust within the Milky Way. To see it, you must shift your perspective away from the points of light and focus on the dark spaces in between, a conceptual leap that demonstrates a uniquely different way of seeing the world. The orientation of this cosmic emu changes throughout the year. When it appears horizontal with its body stretched along the horizon, it is said to be running, and this coincides with the time when real emus are running across the land, mating and laying their eggs. This was a direct signal to begin gathering this important seasonal food source. In contrast, the cluster of stars known to the Greeks as the Pleiades held a different meaning. For many Aboriginal groups, the heliacal rising of the Pleiades, their first appearance in the dawn sky after a period of being unseen, signaled the arrival of the rainy season and the start of the winter planting schedule for certain root vegetables. This knowledge was passed down through songlines, epic oral narratives that wove directions for travel, descriptions of the land, and astronomical events into a single, navigable map of both the Earth and the sky. These intricate systems demonstrate that for ancient peoples, astronomy was never a standalone science reserved for an elite few. It was a practical, integrated framework that governed the entirety of daily life. It determined when to travel and when to stay, when to plant and when to harvest, when to celebrate and when to mourn. There was no division between the scientific and the spiritual, the practical and the mythical. These were all facets of a single, unified understanding of a universe where humanity played an active and participatory role. By studying ethnoastronomy, we begin to decode this lost language. This interdisciplinary approach allows us to look at an ancient artifact, a piece of rock art, or an oral tradition with new eyes. A circle of stones is no longer just a ceremonial site. It might be a calibrated observatory for marking the solstices. A painting of a star on a cave wall is not just a decoration. It could be part of a complex myth that encodes a navigational bearing or a seasonal marker. This field reminds us that long before telescopes and textbooks, the sky was humanity's first library, its first classroom, and its first temple. Every culture in every corner of the globe, looked up and saw not random chaos but patterns, stories, and meaning. They sought to make sense of their place in the cosmos by reading the grand narrative written in the movements of the sun, the moon, the planets, and the stars. Ethnoastronomy gives us the key to reading those stories again, revealing a depth of wisdom and a holistic way of being in the world that we are only now beginning to fully appreciate and from which we have so much to learn. It's a humbling thought that the very same principles which guided ancient voyagers across trackless oceans are now informing some of the most advanced scientific fields of our modern world. The sophisticated environmental intelligence of these early explorers wasn't lost to history. Instead, it's experiencing a powerful renaissance, echoing through disciplines like ecology, meteorology, and physics. Consider the study of bird migration, a cornerstone of ancient wayfinding. Today, ornithologists using satellite tags and radar have mapped flyways with stunning precision, but in doing so, they've confirmed the incredible accuracy of traditional knowledge. The paths these birds take are the very same aerial highways that ancient mariners followed. This research has done more than just chart routes. It has revolutionized our understanding of aerodynamics, revealing how birds harness energy from the wind in ways we are only beginning to emulate in drone and aircraft design. Furthermore, by tracking these migrations, scientists gain a vital window into the health of global ecosystems. Birds are bioindicators. Their arrival times, population numbers, and chosen paths reflect changes in climate, food availability, and even pollution levels, providing an early warning system for the planet's well-being that was first understood by the navigators who watched them so closely. The ancient art of wave piloting, of feeling the ocean's subtle rhythms through the hull of a canoe, finds its direct descendant in modern oceanography. Scientists now deploy vast arrays of sophisticated buoys and satellites to monitor ocean swells, currents, and thermal patterns. This network is essential for everything from predicting the paths of hurricanes to issuing tsunami warnings. The core concept, however, remains unchanged. Understanding that the sea speaks a language of energy and that distant disturbances create patterns that can be read and interpreted. Where a Marshall Islander once felt the refraction of swells around an unseen atoll, a seismologist now analyzes data from pressure sensors on the seafloor to model the propagation of a tsunami wave across an entire ocean. This isn't a replacement of ancient wisdom with modern tech, it's a validation of it. The physical principles are identical. The technology simply allows us to extend our senses, to hear the ocean's whispers on a global scale that a single navigator could only experience locally. Even celestial navigation, largely supplanted by the constant hum of GPS satellites, has retained a revered place in our technological society. It is still a mandatory skill for officers in the world's navies and a cherished discipline in sailing schools across the globe. This isn't just for tradition's sake, it's a profound acknowledgement of its absolute reliability. GPS signals can be jammed, satellites can fail, and solar flares can disrupt communications. But the stars, the moon, and the sun are constants. They are a backup system that cannot be hacked or switched off, a timeless guarantee against the fragility of our own complex inventions. This enduring practice honors the navigators of old not as historical curiosities, but as master scientists whose foundational work remains relevant in an age of silicon and software. Perhaps the most significant legacy of prehistoric navigation is its holistic, systems-thinking approach. Ancient wayfinders never saw the wind, the waves, the birds, and the stars as separate subjects. They understood them as interconnected parts of a single, dynamic system. This worldview perfectly anticipates modern interdisciplinary science, where ecologists work with climatologists and physicists collaborate with biologists to solve complex problems. Researchers are now using this very approach, combining cutting-edge technology with traditional knowledge to map ancient migratory routes with astonishing accuracy. By analyzing satellite imagery, DNA evidence from ancient settlements, and the oral histories of indigenous communities, they are piecing together the precise paths of the Great Polynesian expansion, for example. This synergy doesn't just validate the past, it illuminates it, proving that these methods were not primitive guesswork but highly sophisticated, empirical adaptations to a challenging environment. This fusion of ancient wisdom and modern innovation points toward a more sustainable and resilient future, as we face global challenges like climate change and resource management. The Navigators' ethos of working with nature rather than against it offers a powerful blueprint. By learning from those who first mastered the art of exploration, who understood that true navigation is a dialogue with the world, we can develop technologies and strategies that are in harmony with the planet's rhythms. Their legacy teaches us that the most advanced solution is not always the most complex one. Sometimes it's the one that listens most closely to the wind, the waves, and the wings that have been showing us the way for thousands of years. These epic voyages of settlement, these incredible journeys that populated the most remote corners of our planet, stand as the ultimate testament to the power of prehistoric navigation. We are not talking about a few lost fishermen accidentally drifting to a new shore. We are talking about the deliberate, skilled transportation of entire communities, their food plants, their domesticated animals, and their cultural knowledge across thousands of miles of open ocean. This was humanity's greatest adventure, and it was powered by an intimate understanding of the natural world. The Austronesian expansion is perhaps the most staggering example. Beginning from the island of Taiwan around 5,000 years ago, these remarkable seafarers embarked on a migration that would eventually populate a vast triangle of the Pacific, stretching from Madagascar off the coast of Africa all the way to remote Rapa Nui, Easter Island, and north to the Hawaiian archipelago. This was not a random wandering, it was a calculated, multi-generational project of exploration and settlement. They carried with them the essential ingredients for a new life: taro, yam, and breadfruit seedlings, as well as pigs, dogs, and chickens. The successful establishment of these fragile cargoes on new islands is perhaps the strongest proof that these were planned colonization voyages. You do not accidentally drift to a new land with a hold full of living plants and animals, and then successfully establish a thriving society. This was intentional from start to finish. For a long time, Western academia clung to the idea of accidental discovery, a comfortable myth that downplayed the sophistication of indigenous peoples. The suggestion was that these ancient mariners simply got lost in a storm and were lucky to find land. But the evidence, both from oral tradition and now from modern science, completely shatters this outdated notion. Take the humble chicken, for instance. Genetic studies have traced the DNA of chickens found at ancient Polynesian archaeological sites all the way back to their origins in Southeast Asia. The chicken did not fly across the ocean itself. It was carried in a canoe by people who knew exactly where they were going and had a plan for what to do when they got there. Similarly, the spread of the distinctive Lapita pottery style acts as a cultural fingerprint, marking the trail of these voyagers across the Pacific. The pottery appears, then disappears, as settlers moved from island to island, adapting to new environments but leaving a clear archaeological breadcrumb trail of their journey. This hard evidence forces a dramatic rewriting of human history, one that credits ancient peoples with the agency, courage, and intellectual brilliance they truly possessed. This narrative shift is profoundly important because it challenges the Eurocentric stories many of us learned in school. Figures like Christopher Columbus or Captain James Cook are often hailed as great discoverers, but this framing completely ignores the fact that the lands they reached were already teeming with people who had gotten there first, and often by much more impressive means. When the Norse, those formidable Viking sailors, used their own sophisticated methods of reading seabirds, whales, and the subtle discoloration of the water to reach Iceland and later Greenland, they encountered landscapes that were, to them, new. But their sagas also tell of even earlier voyages, like Leif Erikson's journey to a place he called Vinland on the North American continent. And when they arrived, archaeological evidence at Elance Oaks Meadows confirms they encountered indigenous peoples who had been living there for millennia. The true story of human exploration is not one of a single culture suddenly discovering the world, but a mosaic of countless explorations by countless cultures across tens of thousands of years. Each of these great migrations required a specialized adaptation of navigational knowledge to a unique environment. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's arrival in Australia over 65,000 years ago is a breathtaking feat that likely involved island hopping across the Indonesian archipelago, requiring an understanding of seasonal winds and currents during a period of lower sea levels. The Norse, sailing in a very different part of the world, became masters of reading the harsh North Atlantic. They knew that a sudden increase in certain seabirds meant land was near, and that the presence of drifting vegetation or a change in water temperature could indicate a current flowing from a distant shore. The peopling of the Americas itself, whether along the coastal Kelp Highway or across the Bering Land Bridge, involved incredible journeys through unknown territories, guided by a deep knowledge of the stars for direction and the migratory paths of animals for sustenance. Each of these stories is a unique chapter, yet they all share a common theme: the relentless human drive to see what is over the horizon. Ultimately, this changes our understanding of navigation from a mere technical skill to the very engine of human civilization. It is the story of how we became a global species, how ideas and cultures met and mingled, and how the incredible biodiversity of our planet was shared and cultivated. The banana from Southeast Asia found a new home in Africa. The sweet potato from South America somehow found its way to Polynesia long before European contact, a tantalizing mystery that suggests these ocean highways were traveled in both directions. These connections were made possible by the navigator, the most vital and respected member of a community, whose knowledge literally meant the difference between life and death, between isolation and connection. Their legacy is not just in the settlement of islands, but in the very fabric of our interconnected world, a timeless reminder of what humanity can achieve when we truly learn to read the world around us. This deep spiritual connection between mariners and birds reveals a universal human impulse to find meaning in the world around us, transforming the raw data of survival into resonant cultural truth. The albatross, soaring effortlessly over the most violent storms, became more than just a signpost to land for European sailors. It embodied the very soul of the sea itself, a majestic, untamable spirit. To harm such a creature was to violate a sacred trust, an act of hubris that invited cosmic retaliation, a theme Samuel Taylor Coleridge captured with haunting power in his epic poem. The ancient mariner's killing of the albatross isn't just a mistake in judgment. It's a profound transgression against the natural order, and the horrific punishment that follows, the stagnant sea, the staring crew, the haunting spirits, serves as a stark moral lesson on the consequences of severing that sacred bond. This story, passed down through generations of sailors, wasn't merely a superstition. It was an ecological ethic in narrative form, a powerful deterrent against harming the very guides upon which their lives depended. This symbolism was intricately woven into the very tools of the trade. The weather vane, perched atop a ship's mast or a harbor master's roof, often took the form of a rooster or a directional arrow shaped like a bird. This was not arbitrary decoration. The rooster or weathercock is a creature profoundly sensitive to changes in atmospheric pressure, often becoming restless before a storm. Its placement high above the ground made it a perfect symbol of a creature that could sense what humans could not, its turn into the wind providing a silent, constant commentary on the moods of the sky. Similarly, the compass rose, that ornate star-like symbol found on every classical map, frequently features avian motifs at its cardinal points. These birds are not merely decorative, they are symbolic anchors representing the fixed and knowable directions in a seemingly directionless world, a visual promise that even in chaos, guidance could be found. They are the legacy of an age when the cardinal directions were not abstract concepts, but were intimately associated with the flight paths of specific birds at specific times of day. This transformative power of symbolism provided navigators with something equally as vital as a bearing, emotional and moral fortitude. A voyage across the open ocean was an exercise in extreme isolation and psychological strain. Weeks or months of seeing nothing but water and sky could play tricks on the mind, fostering doubt, fear, and despair. In these moments of profound vulnerability, the sudden appearance of a familiar bird was not just a navigational fix, it was a spiritual intervention. For a Polynesian voyager, the sight of the Manu o Ku white tern was a sign that the god Ku was watching over the canoe. For an Atlantic sailor, a following gull was the soul of a departed shipmate, ensuring they did not lose their way. This symbolic layer transformed the terrifying void of the ocean into a familiar, inhabited space, a realm where the divine was actively communicating through its winged messengers. It turned a desperate struggle for survival into a purposeful journey, a pilgrimage guided by signs and omens. The navigator was no longer just a technician. He was a participant in a sacred dialogue, his success a testament to his faith and his ability to interpret the will of the gods. This rich tapestry of belief and observation reminds us that for our ancestors, the world was always speaking, and the most successful among them were those who learned not just to listen, but to understand the language. For these ancient cultures, the wind was never just moving air. It was a living, breathing entity with a will of its own, a force so powerful and capricious that it could only be understood through the language of myth and divinity. This personification was a profound psychological tool, a way for sailors to conceptualize and engage with an invisible, unpredictable power that held the power of life and death over their voyages. By giving the wind a name, a face, and a personality, they transformed an abstract meteorological phenomenon into a conscious being with whom they could negotiate, plead, and form a relationship. This wasn't a primitive misunderstanding of science. It was a sophisticated cultural adaptation that made the immense, terrifying power of the natural world feel knowable and manageable. The wind god became a crucial intermediary, a divine figure who could be appeased with offerings, honored with chants, and called upon for protection, turning the terrifying chaos of a storm into a story with a potential resolution. In the world of Greek mythology, this intermediary was the god Aeolus, the appointed keeper of the winds. Homer's Odyssey gives us a vivid glimpse into this relationship. Aeolus is depicted not as a distant, indifferent force, but as a hospitable king who receives the hero Odysseus and, in a gesture of great favor, gifts him a leather bag containing all the winds but one, the gentle west wind Zephyrus, that would blow his ship directly home to Ithaca. This story is a perfect metaphor for the sailor's deepest desire, to have control over the uncontrollable. The tragedy, of course, is that Odysseus's crew, believing the bag to hold treasure, opens it and unleashes a catastrophic storm that blows them far off course. The myth teaches a double lesson. The wind is a gift that can be granted by the gods, but human greed and folly can just as easily turn it into a weapon of self-destruction. Aeolus represents the ideal, a rational order imposed on the chaos of the atmosphere. He keeps the winds locked away in a cavern on his floating island, only releasing them at the command of the greater gods, making him a divine air traffic controller for the ancient Mediterranean. This concept of a wind deity who keeps the winds contained in a vessel appears across the ocean in Polynesia, demonstrating a fascinating parallel in human thought. The Hawaiian god La Mau Mau is said to be the possessor of the wind gourd, or Ipu Makani. This was no ordinary gourd. It was a sacred container holding all the winds of the islands. Each wind was a distinct entity with its own name, its own character, and its own specific origin point. La Mau Mau, or his mother Papa, could release these winds by chanting their names. A navigator wouldn't just pray for wind, he would invoke a specific named wind to achieve a specific goal. He might call upon the Kohalelu, a gentle, steady breeze perfect for a long, downwind voyage. Or if he needed to avoid a lee shore, he might respectfully ask for the Kona, a dry southerly wind. But he would also be acutely aware of the fierce and destructive winds like the Nolu, a sudden, violent squall that could tear a sail to pieces. Knowing these names and personalities was as vital as knowing the stars. It was a way of conversing with the environment, of understanding its moods and tendencies on a deeply intimate level. This anthropomorphic framework did more than just provide stories. It provided a practical, functional system for classifying and predicting weather. The personality of each wind god or spirit directly reflected its observed effects. A gentle, beneficent wind deity like the Roman Favonius, another name for Zephyrus, was associated with the mild, plant-fertilizing west wind of spring. In contrast, the Greek Boreas, the god of the north wind, was depicted as a winged, bearded giant of immense strength and a harsh, icy breath, perfectly capturing the violent cold front that could sink a ship in winter. By attributing these events to the whims of a conscious being, navigators developed a mindset of constant respect and attentiveness. You wouldn't curse the wind, you would try to understand what might have angered the wind god. You would be cautious not to offend, and you would perform rituals to ensure a safe passage. This fostered a culture of humility and environmental awareness, where the sea was not a challenge to be conquered but a powerful, sentient realm to be navigated with reverence and skill. This worldview, encoded in the names and stories of the wind gods, was ultimately a survival mechanism, a way of embedding crucial meteorological knowledge into the very heart of cultural identity and spiritual practice. Perhaps the most urgent lesson these ancient techniques hold for us today is their profound sustainability. Every aspect of traditional navigation was powered by renewable resources: the wind in the sails, the stars for guidance, the behavior of birds for direction. There were no batteries to dispose of, no satellite constellations to launch, and no fossil fuels burned to cross an ocean. The entire system operated on a net-zero environmental impact, a perfect harmony with the planet's natural energy flows. This stands in stark contrast to our modern reliance on technology that demands constant power, creates electronic waste, and depends on a fragile global supply chain. The voyaging canoe Hokulea itself has become a powerful symbol of this modern application, often undertaking its long journeys with solar panels powering its communication equipment, proving that ancient wisdom and modern renewable technology can work in beautiful concert. This ethos is inspiring a new generation of engineers and sailors to design vessels that harness both the old and the new, using solar and wind power not as a backup, but as the primary engine for crossing oceans, reconnecting us to the timeless power of nature. Beyond the physical technology, the navigator's mindset offers a crucial blueprint for resilience in an uncertain world. Our modern navigation systems, while incredibly precise, are also incredibly vulnerable. A solar flare, a cyber attack, or simple component failure can render our GPS devices useless in an instant, leaving us utterly disoriented. The traditional navigator, however, possessed a resilient and redundant skill set. If the stars were hidden, they could read the waves. If the waves were calm, they could feel the shift in wind on their skin. Their knowledge was distributed across multiple environmental systems, ensuring they were never reliant on a single point of failure. This is a powerful metaphor for building resilient communities in the face of climate change and other global disruptions. It teaches us the value of diversifying our skills, our food sources, and our energy supplies, ensuring that if one system fails, we have others to fall back on. It champions adaptability and deep observation over rigid dependence on fragile technology. This revival is not happening in a vacuum. It is actively being integrated into educational programs around the world, particularly within indigenous communities. Schools in Hawaii, Aotearoa, New Zealand, and the Marshall Islands are weaving traditional navigation into their curricula. Students are not just learning about the star compass in a book, they are building model canoes, memorizing chants, and going out on the ocean to feel the swell for themselves. The goal is twofold: to foster a powerful sense of cultural pride and identity in young people, and to instill a deep, visceral ethic of environmental stewardship. When a child learns that the flight path of a bird can lead to land, they begin to see that bird not as a trivial creature but as a vital teacher. They understand that the health of the bird population is directly tied to the health of their own culture and survival. This creates a generation that values conservation not as an abstract concept, but as a matter of personal and cultural necessity. Furthermore, the cognitive skills honed by traditional navigation are becoming increasingly valuable in our age of digital distraction. The ability to maintain focused attention for long periods, to hold complex mental models, to recognize subtle patterns in nature, and to commit vast amounts of information to memory, these are all muscles that are atrophying in a world of constant notifications and quick internet searches. Learning to navigate by the stars is a form of cognitive training that strengthens our innate capacities for concentration and spatial reasoning. It forces us to be present, to observe, and to think in deep time, counteracting the impulsive, short-term mindset that our digital devices often encourage. It is a workout for the human brain, reminding us of the incredible processing power we all possess when we disconnect and engage directly with the world. The practical applications of this ancient knowledge extend into the future, inspiring appropriate technology for the modern era. In remote island nations and coastal communities that are on the front lines of climate change, low-tech, affordable navigation aids based on traditional principles could provide a crucial lifeline. Imagine a simple, durable device, a modern incarnation of the stick chart that helps local fishers understand swell patterns to predict storm surges or identify productive fishing grounds without the need for expensive and vulnerable electronics. The principles of reading cloud formations to predict weather could be formalized into community-based early warning systems, empowering villages with knowledge that is locally relevant and freely available. This isn't about rejecting technology. It's about designing it with the wisdom of the past in mind, creating tools that are democratic, durable, and in harmony with the environment. Ultimately, the legacy of prehistoric navigation is far more than a historical curiosity. It is a living, breathing guide for how to live sustainably on a planet that is asking more of us every day. It teaches us that true intelligence is not about dominating nature with our inventions, but about deepening our dialogue with it. It shows us that resilience comes from diversity, of knowledge, of skills, and of perspective. And it offers a profound sense of hope, demonstrating that the solutions to our most complex modern challenges might not lie in an uncertain technological future, but are already written in the stars, carried on the wind, and mapped in the timeless journey of the birds, waiting for us to remember how to read them. Our journey through the ancient art of wayfinding reveals a truth far more profound than mere historical curiosity. It shows us that the greatest voyages in human history were not achieved by conquering nature, but by learning its language, by seeing the flight of a bird not as random movement, but as a divine arrow pointing toward home, by understanding the sweep of stars not as distant lights, but as a rotating clockwork chart, and by feeling the wind not as an obstacle, but as a living, breathing partner. Exploration. This was a science woven into the very fabric of culture, a seamless blend of meticulous observation and meaningful mythology that turned the entire world into a sacred, navigable text. The legacy of these master navigators is not confined to the past. It speaks directly to our present and our future, offering a powerful alternative to our technology-saturated lives. In an age where we willingly outsource our sense of direction to the calm voice of a GPS, we risk losing something vital, our own innate capacity to observe, to deduce, and to connect deeply with the environment around us. The ancient wayfinder's mind was a living library, a resilient system of knowledge that could not be hacked, jammed, or switched off. It teaches us the profound value of self-reliance and the importance of building a diverse skill set, ensuring we are never dependent on a single, fragile point of failure. This is a crucial lesson in resilience, urging us to cultivate our own mental maps and to remember that true guidance often comes not from a screen, but from the world itself. More than just a technical skill, this ancient wisdom offers a blueprint for a more sustainable and harmonious way of living. Their entire system operated on a net-zero environmental impact, powered by the renewable energy of the wind, the stars, and their own keenly honed senses. They moved through the world not as conquerors, but as participants in a delicate, interconnected system. This ethos of partnership and profound respect is perhaps the most valuable compass they can hand us today. As we face global challenges like climate change, their example guides us toward solutions that work with nature's rhythms, not against them, reminding us that the most advanced technology is often the one that has been refined by nature itself for thousands of years. So the next time you look up at the night sky, try to see it not as a void, but as a dome of stories and direction. When you feel the wind on your face, remember that it has a name and a history, that it was once a god to be understood, not a force to be fought. And when you see a bird in flight, consider the ancient mariners who saw in its path a promise of land and a message from the divine. Let their incredible journey inspire your own. Let it rekindle a sense of wonder and curiosity about the natural world, encouraging you to look a little closer, to learn the names of the stars in your own sky, and to navigate your life with the same blend of courage, observation, and profound respect that guided them across the greatest wilderness on Earth. Thank you for sailing on this voyage of discovery through history's greatest